Andrew.
Mauro, hey, great to hear from you, old friend. I am so excited to be participating in your podcast on your new platform, Cannabis Industries. Um, I'm really looking forward to this. You know, did a lot of writing for the Stone Society, and I was a little sad to see you had to put that project to sleep for a while. And I understand you went on and you did a lot of work in the cannabis field. But here you are with this new platform, and I'm excited to be here for a new decade. And it's good to hear from your old friend. How's it going? What's up?
Yeah, man, likewise. Now I've been good. It's this. Obviously, we're all dealing with this Corona crisis, but this has resulted in me starting this new project. I ran the Stone Society for I don't know, 8 years, I think.
Yeah.
There were some good years, but there were also some bad years, and definitely one of the biggest mistakes I made looking back at it. I never will be sure about it. What screwed it up was that changed the permalinks, and that ruined the Google ranking, and from then on it went downhill. But as with all things, there's an upside and a downside to it. So indeed, I went in a different direction. I connected with a foundation that is really doing bulk of the work on the activism side, and from that I expanded my expertise also. Instead of putting it all in one project, I divided it up, and I did some skills were useful for the foundation, others were useful for commercial projects, and altogether I was able to make a little income for myself and work in the industry.
And doing a lot of effort. I mean, since we started working together, I started writing for the Stone Society in 2015, and there was just like maybe one or two U.S. states that had like Washington had legalized, but since then, a lot of headway. But yeah, you're right, man. But this year has been a real crazy situation going on, and things are really strange. Absolutely. So you came, I'm just curious. So this was a brainchild while you were in quarantine or something, and you like forced to stay at home, and you're like, hey, this is it. You had a revelation. I'm going to, launch this project and stuff. Because that's cool. I mean, you turned that situation into a positive. How'd that come about? I'm just curious.
Yeah, pretty much. I was actually looking at the stocks of the stock market after following the news all the time, and they say you can't read what the world is doing from the stock market, but I figured I'm going to take a look at it anyway. And quickly I turned looking to the Canadian stocks that are on the New York Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq. And from then on, I started thinking, why is there no website like this in the Netherlands? And that made me start this project because I was here alone and I needed something to do, and I like working with websites. I like doing this editing. Doing it for a foundation, there's no money incentive. You don't get paid more if you get more visitors to the website, for example, but you also cannot compete as a foundation with commercial websites. So this website basically brings me back to indeed the time of the Stone Society. It also reminds me a lot about that period when I was sitting at my old student house and just working on this project alone, and or in the beginning with friends actually, but a couple of years in, and I was doing it all alone. And comparing to this period, it's quite the same. I actually even use the same team for the website, but you don't really see it. But it is actually the same. Yeah, I figured why not? It's something I can do from home. I have already the experience. I have a lot of pictures I can use already. I think it just pretty much came together. And also a big factor is that it works well with the things I am already doing and the colleagues that I have in other things. This project will benefit all of them, and it's also a bit of a see it as an economical activism, as in trying to make this point of getting across to our politicians and also journalists that this is a real thing, and it's also in a way as a warning for what might go wrong if you don't do it right, because it's not all good things that we see from the United States or Canada. I'm not just praising that it is an industry, right?
Well, I think that information, proper channeling of accurate reporting and journalism is always paramount. Information in any field is the most important thing, and it reminds me of what Dana Beal was saying. I asked Dana Beal, the pot activist, the longtime pot activist, he's not a rich man or anything like some of the people that would sort of benefit currently from like cannabis industries and a lot of people trying to get in financially, but he never got that financial benefit. And I'm like, why are you in it? You're 70. Why are you still active? And I'm like, you're not getting a payoff. And he said like, well, it's the influence, it's the power of influence, so when he speaks, he can affect change, sometimes big, sometimes small, but that's, but anyway, getting back to the quarantine, that's cool. I mean, I know people that were, they took it bad. They were very worried, fearful for their lives. I mean, let's face it, this is a time, when our lives are threatened, and then the virus is curtailing our freedom, and a lot of things we would normally do, we just couldn't do. And so some people, got into depression or hard drugs or something like that. But I see you had a channel. I myself, I'm in New York during this whole period. I'm still here. I actually haven't left yet. But we were for a time what they called the epicenter for the whole world, and it was crazy. And it was tough, and but I channeled it also. What I did was I did something a little different than I normally do, because I'd been doing a lot of writing for especially the last 6 years, but I'd been a musician before that. So I was like really focused on writing, and I got like an EP's worth of stuff recorded, because I got the whole setup, like drums, bass, guitar, and my girlfriend, she and I do vocals. And so just a lot of projects that I'd been meaning to get to. And we got some really good tracks, and and this is a good opportunity. I'll pre-plug it. There's some things coming out on like Spotify and Apple Music later in August. My first single is going to be called Orange Sunshine, and we shot a video in our bamboo forest backyard. And it's really an homage to like, that sort of 1960s era, and specifically a tip of the hat to, the famous LSD that was that strong, potent LSD from the 60s. So it's got, I like this psychedelic thing, obviously Floyd, but some of the newer bands like Temples and stuff are doing really good stuff. So anyway, that's how I kind of channeled this really difficult period. And, I can look back with it with like, hey, I have something positive take away. And it kind of like saved my sanity, So I'm a functioning human being, and here we are. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I know what Orange Sunshine is. And on the old website, I used to cover psychedelics as well, but in a way that's also caused some problems later. Not specifically me that I can recall like this, but I remember from a foundation in the Netherlands called Legalize. They want all drugs legalized. They had trouble, for example, getting money from the coffee shops to do their activism, because they said, oh, you want to do cannabis, but you also want all the other drugs. No, we're not going to support you. So go on. To make a bit of a segue, you actually got to speak Rick Dublin, which is really cool.
Yeah, that was one of my exciting things I did while I was with Stone Society. And I went to the Horizons conference in downtown New York. And, he's like one of our big, I guess, psychedelic guru in our age. Back in the 60s, earlier age, you had Timothy Leary, you had Ram Dass, and also some, shady characters, like Owsley Stanley. There's a whole bunch. It's a weird world, that, and it's a fascinating world, and I've been intrigued about it, reading about it, in books and things all my life since my teenage years, and and as I mentioned, just recently writing some music about it. And I'm not like personally advocating it. It's actually like a mixed bag, because in this song we've got like Ram Dass, we talk about Charlie Manson. There's a dark side and a light side. But when I talk to Rick Doblin, he understands like, the balance of it. And one of the questions I asked him was, listen, psychedelics are unpredictable, and isn't that a problem with science, or when you're trying to treat someone that has a specific thing? You could have a good trip, you could have a bad trip, you could go psychotic, or you could, become really self-realized. And he had a great answer. He said that, well, actually, the unpredictability of it is what makes it special and helpful, because you're not sure of the outcome, and it brings you out of the box. So if someone has a problem, let's say, and in this regards, he was talking about, let's say, treating, addiction, or that kind of thing, or mental illnesses, they're stuck in a box. And then, so this takes, psychedelics, be it psilocybin or LSD or whatnot, ayahuasca, it'll take you out of a box. And really, maybe that's the only way to do it, because what does our pharmaceutical industry offer? There are predictable results with a lot of their medication. I don't keep up with it, but the old standards, Thorazine or whatever, it'll lithium, all these things, it gives you a desired outcome. But basically that desired outcome is you become more vegetable-like, or you become sedated. Really, you're just treating a symptom, and you're not getting into the issue that, started it. I would presume, though I'm not a psychiatrist, that it must have, like, a problem must have stemmed from some kind of a trauma or something like that. And how would you deal with that? Well, maybe, you would have to confront that. And then most people aren't in a position normally to do that. But a psychedelic like LSD or something, according to Doblin and those in that field, suggests that, hey, this will take you out of the box and make you, confront these issues that you normally wouldn't. And the thing is, but it could be dangerous. So, it would be helpful to have properly trained psychiatrists. So he emphasized that, and I said, so you're saying, should we not should they not use psychedelics, let's say, recreationally? And he said, well, he said that there's more risk under that environment. However, he's not against it, because there's a lot of communal settings, whether it be a rave, oftentimes it's like at Burning Man, or, whatever, a group of friends up in the forest, or having some kind of a retreat. Oftentimes people do have life-changing revelations that are positive, or if they have trauma, they can discuss it with friends. But he does warn that under those conditions, there is more risk. But anyway, Rick, and not only is he so knowledgeable, but he was so personable. I approached him. He didn't know me from anybody, although I did, say I was with Stone Society, and he warmed up to me immediately. But he was, he was jovial. He was joking, and he was very insightful. And so, a great person as well to meet.
Interview will actually be able for people to read when this podcast comes live, as well as the Cannabis in Vietnam story, the Saigon report, which was published when the website went live. Maybe that's a good segue to go into that story, because one of the interesting things I took out of this story from Vietnam was that they actually had branded cannabis there already in the end of 60s.
Yeah, you know what? I was surprised to learn that as well. The Craven A and Park Lane, some of these names. Vietnam is a lot of Asia. I've been doing a lot of traveling, especially the last 10 years, and I'm glad I have, because who knows when you'll be able to go there next. I was there like twice, I think, in the last 2015 and 2017. But yeah, you know what? The history there is amazing. And then when I was researching for this article, while I was there, actually, because I was just in Ho Chi Minh City, then I went to Hanoi. I'm actually half Vietnamese. And so, I actually met up with some relatives while I was there, though I was there for like a film project. But the thing is, and I wanted to do this report from there. Thought it was kind of exciting. And so I was, researching for it. And I, found out, man, a lot of interesting stuff. But yeah, they had, they up, I think it was up until like 68, where, let's see here. It says, prior to the arrival of the Americans and the initiation of the Vietnam War, drug laws in Vietnam were ill-defined and had little priority in its criminal justice system. And as a result, marijuana could be purchased openly in Saigon. And a survey conducted in 1966 by the U.S. military identified 29 outlets in the city that sold pot. There were packaged brands, pre-rolled marijuana cigarettes available side by side with the other cigarettes. For instance, a brand like Craven A, and another popular one was Park Lane packages. And but by 1968, that changed, and then the U.S. Army started putting the clamp on that, and they started. And if U.S. soldiers were caught using it, they would be fined or incarcerated, and for some reason, they really put the clamp on it. It also coincides with when Nixon became elected in 68. I don't know if there's a direct correlation there. But the interesting outcome of that sort of heavy-handed marijuana prohibition was that heroin usage sort of blossomed. And so there's a strange link there. But the other curious thing is that heroin and its original form, opium, has a long-standing history in Vietnam and Southeast Asia that goes back centuries, if not longer, but definitely with colonial intervention. And the French, before the Americans, were there for a long time, but they were actually involved in opium manufacturing and distribution and sales. Well, this is an old story. It goes way back for the French, the British, with the East India Company, obviously, now that we think about it. And then as well as the Dutch, your very own country, they were also involved. So there's this strange sort of link between European colonialization and sort of narcotics growth and sales. But the funny thing is that they weren't really big on cannabis in general. And when they suppressed that, this harder, definitely deadlier drug, opium and things of that nature, would take hold. And really, there's more of a profit incentive, I see, right from the outset, why that would be the case. Because with marijuana, you're not really becoming, from what I've found, you're not becoming like really physically addictive. It could be habit forming, sure. But with heroin or opium, you're like physically addicted, and then you need it and you can't survive, or you might die if you don't have it. And so the incentive to buy it becomes greater, and there's more money being produced there. It's definitely a more evil situation. But I don't want to morally judge drugs in general. My attitude is that, these are states of consciousness. Whether it's marijuana, which is actually falls in the psychedelic. That's from my background, has it listed as a mild psychedelic. And then you've got the narcotics and the depressants and the amphetamines. But I see drugs as kind of like a consciousness. They're all different levels of consciousness. and their harm or their benefit depends on where you are and what you need at that time. So like, I'll just throw this quickly out, because we're talking about opium or heroin, and there are great evils associated with that. However, under a circumstance, let's say you're in severe pain. I mean, this is an obvious example, but it needs, I'd like to reiterate it on certain occasions. If let's say you're in a car crash or something, your arm gets chopped off. Hell, man, I mean, you get a shot of heroin, that might save your life. But because your consciousness is so low, it's like in a pain level, it needs to raise up. But if you're like a normally functioning, if you feel good, your dopamine levels and endorphin levels are functioning well, and you have a family, a job, and you're part of society, and you start doing this heroin stuff, it'll it lowers your consciousness. So then it becomes an evil. Anyway, that's just my take on the whole spectrum of drugs in general, states of consciousness, and where it fits in on each person at their particular time in life.
Yeah, there are a couple of takes that I wrote down that I can get back to in following your story. First, what you said indeed about the Nixon era. Yeah, that makes sense because that was around the time that conventions on drugs were created, and when Harry Anslinger took his policy worldwide. And one of the examples of this, Vietnam was probably part of it also, but indeed Southeast Asia, but specifically Thailand, they didn't want to introduce these laws. They had a rich history of opium use, and they didn't want to do it. But the Americans simply said, if you will not implement this law, then we will boycott and we will not do business with you. And that in the end made them turn around. It also, when you mentioned the East Indian Company, that's indeed goes back also to the Dutch. And our drug law is actually still also called the opium law. And there's a long history that the Dutch have with drugs, and especially the trade of it, because it really started with the opium trade, which once actually paid off the debts of the king. These trading companies, they were also the start of the stock market. And going from opium, the Dutch eventually went into coca as well. They were bringing little cuttings from South America, bring to their colony in Indonesia, in Java. They would plant these coca cuttings and harvest the coca leaves and then bring those back to the Netherlands, where they would have the cocaine factory. There they would produce cocaine for be used in mostly wars. So going even into the First and the Second World War, Allied were basically fighting on cocaine until Hitler said to his scientists, we need something that the Allies are having too. And so what the German scientists did, they came up with speed, with amphetamines. So it really was in the end a war there between cocaine and amphetamines, and cocaine won.
Yeah, the Nazis, you know what, they were, it's always a fascinating study, Germany in the 30s and 40s and 20s. But yeah, you're right. He came up with amphetamine and then more strong stuff because Hitler was like, we need a super drug. We want to create the super soldier. And so, and I did a story on this for a piece on this. And they came up with like a thing called, I think it's DIX, which was a combination of methamphetamine, cocaine, and eucadol, which is an interesting eucadol. It was a substitute for opium or heroin because they were running out because of the war effort. So they really, and I think eucadol is an opiate, but they did also invent at that time, I believe it was methadone. So yeah, that's the wars, and there's a rich history there. And I think human society is closely intertwined with the plant society and drugs and plant consciousness affecting drugs. But if you're talking about wars, something that I've been meaning to research more and want to get into at some point heavily is like the 1800s regarding the Opium Wars 1 and 2, that, those industries that you mentioned earlier, and, that sort of Chinese British sort of the whole dynamic there between the Opium Wars and Britain forcing China to grow and sell and use opium. I mean, it's a fascinating and very dark history. But I think, as it relates to cannabis, it's usually these heavy-handed drugs that, lead to this sort of violence and a monetary base. And, and I think that cannabis, it provides a different disposition. And really, I like it for like one aspect is its benefits for, let's say, the economy and like hemp products and the hemp industry. Like the U.S. was, there was no, it was a big part of our industry, making paper, string, everything, clothing, and it was never an issue. But you mentioned Harry Anslinger. And so, when this guy came along and then they created the Federal Bureau of Narcotics back in 1930, suddenly the whole game changed. There was never a problem. There was never an epidemic regarding cannabis. And suddenly it was demonized. And it was like this horrific thing. Nobody even thought about maybe smoking it. But, the thing is, some people smoked it, but some people smoke cigarettes with much more dire consequences. And Harry Anslinger came in, he demonized it. But to tie in with what's going on today, and I talked to Dana Beal about this just on Sunday. We had lunch. And the thing is, he points out that Harry Anslinger came in, and the guy was a racist. So, and he was basically using marijuana and associating it with like Mexicans and Black usage, and then using that as a way to incarcerate people, but also, to limit the use of cannabis. There's a lot of dark things related to that.
Yeah, for sure. Many of these stories I read about in Chasing the Scream by Johan Hari. I put a review of the book also on the website because I read it a couple of years ago, but it was so inspiring to me as an activist also, because when I read these stories, especially the one that comes to mind is the one about Billie Holiday.
Yeah.
I had tears rolling down my face just because of reading what happens there really. And it's definitely a motivator to do what I do. It's maybe in the Netherlands there's less of this drug related racism going on, but if you really look to the beginning of the war on drugs, it is basically pure racism. And then what also comes out of it, the war itself, the war on drugs, caused more casualties than the drugs ever would.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that's what I started researching, for the next, story for you. But the thing is, I met Dana. I hadn't seen him for like 5 months. We had dinner like in January, and then this whole COVID thing hits. Usually I like to get together with him every few months, and he updates me on the latest. He's always so active. But, here's this guy. He's 73. Turns out that, while we're like hunkered down in like this sort of quarantine, he's out there. He flew out to Seattle and took part in the that CHOP sort of Seattle protest, the Black Lives Matter protest, where they sort of activists took over like a 6-block radius in the center of Seattle, considered it a no police zone. And he goes in there. He created this big banner, him and his activist group. It was, I think it said something like, "This is a Trump-free zone." And then he hangs it over the police department, which was forced to shut down. And then there's video of him. He was just showing me the other day of him, right there in the park there in the CHOP zone. Like there's Black Lives Matter. They've got the microphones and they're doing their thing. And then they hand it to Dana Beal, and he goes off and he's talking about ibogaine. And I'm like, Dana, how does how does all this sort of this Black Lives Matter, defund the police, all this, how does that segue with your activism, and this ibogaine movement? And he's like, oh yeah, it's very simple. So, and just to reiterate, his, obviously he's, some consider him the grandfather of pot activism, because he started, so many movements like the, 4th of July smoking, or the Marijuana Global March. But anyway, he started back in the 60s. But his kick for the last 7 years has been to legalize ibogaine in the treatment of heroin addiction. Basically, it's kind of, I'm not, the science of it, I'm not really, it eludes me a bit. It's not exactly a psychedelic. It's like a euphoric or something, but it puts you into some kind of a sort of waking sleep state. But the point is, he said that, look, if you legalize ibogaine and if you give it to heroin addicts, it'll cure their heroin. And the thing is, you're not going to need cops, because first of all, you mentioned the war on drugs engenders crimes. So many people, so much of our prison population is made up of drug offenses, whether it be minor or more severe, the variety of drugs. I mean, the prison industrial complex is, funded by this drug war. So he's saying, look, a lot of these addicts or crime associated with hard drugs, namely heroin and then also methamphetamine, he says it has a positive effect on that addiction. Once you give this to people who are going to withdrawal, they are not, they don't feel that addiction anymore. And then in effect, they can be cured in 24 hours. That's what the research shows. And as a result, you can actually, realistically defund the police in that regards, because how much of the police force is, chasing down criminals, incarcerating criminals, et cetera, et cetera. So that he was saying that was how it worked. And that vectored in nicely with what Black Lives Matter was doing. And then they shared the podium together. So, it wasn't, I was surprised to see him up there on YouTube. But then again, I wasn't, because it's Dana Beal. So there you go.
Yeah, he's a curious character that I actually was lucky enough to meet once in Barcelona for a meeting of ANCOT, which is a European organization that is trying to push for better drug laws. And there I could already see that it was really difficult for him also, as just an American coming into this group of Europeans, and his frustration was also big. But yeah, I can also understand where he was coming from. But yeah, he was big and still is on the ibogaine thing. And I actually know a thing or two about it, because a good friend of mine who passed away sadly enough in 2016, Joep Omen, great inspirator, and still looks over it. He set up this ANCOT organization and was also at the base of the foundation that I'm working for. He said to me in a long car ride after I asked him, Joep, you've been working with drugs for so long. What was really your most interesting drug experience? So after doing a little bit of thinking, he said to me, ibogaine. I said, oh, okay, I didn't see that one coming. Why ibogaine? And he told me, well, when you do it, it actually takes 48 hours. The first 24 are really difficult, I believe, and the other 24 are a bit easier. But over the whole course, you cannot move. You cannot get up and go to the toilet. Someone will really have to take care of you on that side, because it feels like your veins are filled with poison. You can't move. And he said that when you take this, it's really like holding up a mirror to yourself and seeing yourself and seeing things that you can improve. It is indeed a bit far going, bringing this message or trying to bring this message of ibogaine at these Black Lives Matter protests, but for sure, cannabis and the whole drug war is a huge cause of that, or it's for sure a part of it.
What's going on now, it makes me think, because I wasn't around in the 60s. I didn't see that sort of thing, the protest, but you read about it, you see it in the you hear about it in the music, retrospective films, and then you think, oh wow, man, those are some wild times. And then you're here in the 2020, and I'm just walking down the street, and there's a protest coming up the street in Brooklyn or Manhattan, and it's pretty wild here. I mean, you might have heard some of the story. People. So it gets into looting and violence, and I'm thinking, hey, this is like the '60s. I asked Dana the other day. I said, hey, Dana, you were there. You were active in the '60s. What's the comparison between now and the '60s? Is there a similarity? Because I'm thinking there is, and he said no. I'm like, it was just kind of a deadpan no. But then we explored it a little bit. He mentioned, well, first of all, there isn't an actual war going on, like the Vietnam War. So, okay, granted. I was comparing it to '68. And he's like, well, no, because if Nixon is Trump, then that would be that 68 would be more like 2016. Okay, all right. So it was kind of sort of nitpicking. But one parallel I got that I thought was similar was that, Nixon started the whole methadone drug treatment program. And so the fact is, heroin was a big problem back then. And so they started the methadone treatment program under Nixon. And I'm like, this problem is bigger than ever today, this sort of narcotics addiction. And I'm thinking, hey, this is a new age. I don't know. What about ibogaine? Maybe that has some relevance today, like methadone back then, but an actual cure, not just a substitute. And we know, that drug, it has a lot of problems, but the struggle continues. And he was intrigued by, we followed that track down a bit. But the thing is, that drug has a lot of relevance as the problem. And it reminds, speaking of presidents and stuff, and ibogaine was recently in the national news, like about 5 months ago, because Joe Biden, who might very well be president, because if the election was held today, would win, because he's leading Trump by like 10 points. But the fact of the matter is, his son, I forget which one, if it was Hunter or the other one, but the point was that dude had a drug problem. He was addicted. And he was convinced that ibogaine could help him. And I think he traveled to overseas. I don't know. I need to look into that a little bit more. And he pursued that. But the point is, if these things have this potential to cure people of something so terrible and hideous as addiction to heroin and stuff, they should be at least available for research. And it's completely outlawed, and it's like Schedule 1 and everything in the US. And then so that's where Dana's at. He is really sort of he's like a pit bull. He doesn't care about money or this. He just like, that's what he did with cannabis activism for like 40 years. And look, we're beginning to see change on a global level regarding hemp, and he's sort of a big reason for that. And here he is. He's got his sights set on ibogaine, and maybe this new decade we'll see some changes, positive changes.
Yeah, I hope so. Actually, with heroin, the interesting thing, or connected to Dutch laws over here, it was thanks to the use of heroin that was spiking in the Netherlands around the start of the 70s, that they changed the law so that cannabis became tolerated and was seen as a soft drug, and heroin and other drugs were seen as hard drugs, because they could see, they had really good, pure heroin here in the Netherlands, and people would take these cheap flights that were coming up back then to the Netherlands, and they would come here and find these really pure heroin, even though they were already using it at home, but a worse quality. So they came here and they used this very powerful stuff, and they were actually dying out in the streets on the Zeedijk, for example. So that made politicians realize, and a lot of special people who helped overturn these laws, of course, they were luckily convinced at some point, this is different. Just let them smoke their weed. It's a lot less harmful than heroin is.
Yeah, people drink their beers and things, But yeah.
I was thinking also because one of the stories that will also be published in a little bit also this month is your story on the synthetic cannabis in Turkey, which I also start with a sentence to introduce the article, is that synthetic cannabis would not exist if cannabis would be legal.
Yeah, that was That was a wild article. That was a wild trip. It was at 2014. There was that whole ISIS thing. And it was, it fascinated me, but it caught my attention from a different aspect was the use of like a type of methamphetamine called Captagon that was being alleged that the ISIS was using. And this was initially found like by whether it was British soldiers or something. And then it came out in like the Telegraph or some article. Actually, no. It came out before that. That was the drug in the region. And then I came across some articles saying that they had pills, that dead ISIS soldiers had pills on them. So what happened was that I looked into it further and, said, hey, look, it looks like the evidence is that they're using Captagon, a big amphetamine drug down there. And I'd like to find out more. So, and then I talked to, Vice magazine, which is right here in Brooklyn. And I actually just walked down and I went in and I talked to one of the editors and I presented them with this story concept because I'd been writing it on my sort of Medium blog at the time. I was like, listen, I'm willing to go over there because what's going on is that this town called Kobani is under siege, but it's right across the border from Turkey. So I have no desire to go into Syria. You couldn't pay me to get in there. But all the Western journalists are gathering right, on the border overlooking that country. And then I'm like, well, it's a good news event. And then to do some research into this and, sell it and see if Vice is interested. And they're like, yeah, go for it. We're into it, But, I wasn't on their payroll. I went there and I researched it. But, I was there for like a few weeks and I was doing, a bunch of things on the side, like, for instance, doing a refugee story. There was a lot of Syrian Kurdish refugees going over. So that was a very big human interest angle. And I did go to Kobani and take a lot of good footage of actual war going on there. I didn't actually uncover any Captagon information, but I did research synthetic bonsai use, which is their local name in Turkey for synthetic drugs. And it turned out that it was a huge problem there, And so I wrote, that was like the second piece I wrote for you on my Turkey trip. But yeah, that was something really interesting. And I think that this is something maybe even more deadly than heroin because, it's proliferating everywhere. I saw it actually. I read about it in Vietnam. There's a problem in China because of the access and the internet. And in the story I wrote for you, and this is a while ago, so I had to reread it, but this is 2015. You could just get online, Google it, and that, you can order it just like you would order something from Amazon. And then I had noticed that you could actually get it from like Shenzhen or, down in China. The point is that I think that's part of the problem. And people use it for various reasons, whether it's to fight or work or become more productive. But it's just as deadly, if not worse, than anything else. And then the problem comes when here they're using it to substitute marijuana use, cannabis use, or worse, to disguise it as cannabis and sell it. Or, the case being that, hey, the authorities will make something illicit or illegal, but, they have to be scientific about it. So they say, oh, this molecule is illegal, right? This molecule is illegal. These guys that manufacture this are scientists. So they just change a molecule or two, and then suddenly they're selling again, and it's legal. And then so they come under all different sources, brand names like Turkey, it's bonsai, but there's spice and things. Now, we had a big problem right here in Brooklyn just recently, actually, like back last winter. There were 5, I'm in Bushwick, which is a cool, it's right next to Williamsburg. It's an interesting, diverse, some artistic sort of elements, and then hardworking, families. But, down at sort of the main sort of train interchange area, which is just really a half a mile away, there was like one day, like 6 people dropped dead from like synthetic marijuana. They bought from like the bodegas there, the delis. And the cops came in and actually shut down one of the bodegas there. There's like 4 of them in that sort of one corner section. people, if you just walk, like I said, it's a nice sort of neighborhood, but if you walk through that area, there's people acting erratic, acting weird, and you just keep your guard up. But that doesn't come from, smoking marijuana. It's this weird, this synthetic stuff that will make people crazy. And I think one of the outcroppings of this is that marijuana is illegal. So they, instead of purchase, at least in New York. Now things are changing, of course, but anyway, just getting back to here and what we've been dealing with for the past really 100 years now. People dropping dead from this, and all they want to do is smoke a little reefer.
Yeah, for sure. It is connected. I think also, but it might be a while before New York finally legalizes it. Of course, we still have to deal with this crisis, but as far as I know, New York keeps extending it, and there doesn't seem to be any real push for it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with this crisis. I asked, you hear stories all the time. There was one that came up recently that cannabis can, guard against or cure coronavirus. I presented that to Dana Beal. He's like, no. What it does, it could increase some of your immunity, but it's not going to eradicate it or make you completely immune. So in that regards, he estimated maybe a 10%, if not like increase. There's all kinds of information out there, but obviously if you have a stronger, healthier immune system, you're going to become more resistant. But this is a real game changer, and who knows what's going to happen. I just want to mention, regarding what we've done in the past, and then, just want to mention that, because I got that sad news from you about Julian Stobbs and how he passed away earlier this month. And it was a real shock because it was through you that I met Julian and his wife, Myrtle, obviously the famous Daga couple, the cannabis activists in South Africa. And I think it was back in 2017. And I guess I was trying to do a film or something for Cannabis News Network that you sort of linked me to. And Julian had done some work for him, and he had some equipment, namely like microphones or things, and he was going to give some things to me because we were in town they were in town for some UN demonstration. So I met the couple. We met, my girlfriend and I, Sonia, met Julian and Myrtle down at the Hyatt Hotel on 42nd Street in a bar. And we had a great time. I mean, we really hit it off. They gave us one of their Daga t-shirts, one each, and a lot of written material, reading material. And they invited us out to the South African property they have. And, I'm serious. Sonia and I were, going to take them up on that offer. It was just a matter of time. And so it just is such a shock that he died in such a way that is so, violent, and a man who is so peaceful and, just spread the message of peace. And he was just so helpful. So that's tragic, man. And, but it was through you that I got to meet this great, great man. Sad news.
Yeah, for sure. I actually forgot indeed. I think it was 2016 for when the Ungas was happening in New York, from which in the end nothing came out of it, as the pessimists already were thinking. And the UN still seems to be blocking a lot of it. Even recently, the World Health Organization recommended changes to the scheduling of cannabis. They keep postponing even to talk about it within the UN. And now, apparently, they have had a meeting about it. But the question is if really something comes out of it, or if it's just for CBD or just for hemp.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes obviously these things move very slowly. But the Daga couple, they were always at the forefront of pushing that through. And maybe someday their work will come to fruition. But yeah, man, I mean, that's the problem, right? On a worldwide level scale, there's a lot of work to do. As Dana Beal said in one of my previous interviews, I was like, you must be like really optimistic with all the progress we've had. He's like, yeah, but there's a lot, there's still a lot to do. And then he ended the interview by saying, but you know what? I've been to the other side of the mountain. And let me tell you, there's pot on the other side of the mountain. I was like, okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's also worrying, especially seeing now with the legalization happening and having happened in Canada and with the states in the US. It seems very much still that the rich are getting richer, and indeed activists or people who would like to work in the industry, they seem to fall out of the boat, like we say. And also when the US would finally federally legalize it, it would cause also change in the UN and on a worldwide level, which you also mentioned on my previous podcast, is that I already see a link, or I see happening, that Amazon, for example, will become involved with the cannabis market. In the end, we will be getting it off Amazon, and Jeff Bezos will just get richer and richer.
Yeah, that's sad. I mean, that's what the thing. That was my concern. I had talked to Dana about it just because of his lifelong activism and the fact that he should be a rich man by now, and he's the opposite thereof. But, you hear folks like a year or two ago, the former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, who's, a staunch Republican. I'm sure he's a great guy. And especially now he's more popular because now he's thrown his ring into cannabis legalization. And I think he mentioned he's getting involved in the industry somehow. But there's an example, right? I mean, especially with the Republicans who being so sort of anti-cannabis all this time, suddenly saying, hey, they're totally switching the script and saying, oh yeah, we're all into it now, or some of them. And why? Because obviously there's a profit motive and they see a way to benefit themselves. So I guess that's part of the problem. I hear a lot of activists talking about, well, now that it's being decriminalized or legalized, but it's being done in a way that is, sort of like you said, kind of like favoring the industry or a few. It's a sticky subject.
Yeah, for me, I'm not per se against capitalism. In fact, as long as it is here, you have to make use of it. But on the other hand, every person on this planet should be allowed to grow cannabis for their own consumption.
Yeah, I mean that. I guess that, there you go. I mean, if it's legal, you should be able, those who want it should grow it like anything else in their backyard. So at least there's that.
For me, it's not legal if you're not allowed to grow it yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I would think that should be part of the stipulation. But you see, yeah, maybe they're not going to do it because exactly, you don't want to be caught in a corner, maybe like with tobacco or something.
Well, here in the Netherlands, there's one party that's really pushing for a change in the drug laws and cannabis, but we then keep pushing them to also include the homegrown. But one of their arguments is, yeah, we can't also do that. That would take it too far. That should be at the base of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree that should definitely be part of the stipulation. Otherwise, it's as good as being illegal, and those at the forefront of that movement, like such as yourself, I think that is something, a stipulation that shouldn't, it shouldn't be stopped. The push shouldn't be stopped until everybody is allowed to do that.
What I do like about cannabis and also the industry is that there is far more to it than just the growing of cannabis and the selling of cannabis and the consumption of cannabis. One of these things that comes to mind is also a story of yours from back in the day that I will republish because I find it interesting for this reason. It's about this New York Cannabis Film Festival, which I think is a great idea, and I would really like to see something like that here.
Oh yeah, that film festival was a lot of fun. I'd been to a couple since. They've actually had one every year. That there's been four since that. I think the first one was 2016 or 2015. But I noticed there hasn't been one this year yet. Not even a mention of it. And of course, that's understandable. But that article I wrote for you, that was a lot of fun. It's a freewheeling thing. It's a great genre. I think there's a merger between cannabis and filmmaking. Like there seems to be a certain musical sort of circles. There's an openness, so it's a natural sort of thing. I enjoyed watching the films and subsequent films as well. It's not a strict genre. It's not like, oh, it has to be about this and that. As Michael, one of the founders, said, basically there could be. It's like two types of films that could be involved in a cannabis film festival. One is that you're dealing directly with cannabis, whether it's a documentary or it's some kind of narrative film that has cannabis in it, or they interact with, or another thing, it has nothing to do with cannabis, and yet it's aesthetically pleasing to watch while you're on cannabis. I said, well, you mean like Wizard of Oz? He's like, absolutely. So, a cannabis a film that could be, submitted, something that could be that could be viable for a cannabis film festival. It could be a film made 100 years ago or any time in between, aesthetically pleasing. But, one takeaway I got from that particular article was that, there was a documentary and it followed the life of Dr. Raphael McCollum, who lives in Israel. But he had discovered that the brain creates its own THC-like substance. I didn't know that before. And I was intrigued. So, I learned a lot from that. He named it, this discovery, this chemical in the brain, anandamide, which means bliss in Sanskrit. And it got me to thinking drugs in general. And what I was talking about earlier about states of consciousness. I think that, just generally speaking, though, but all these different drugs, I think it mimics something that we're already creating inside of us. But perhaps due to one reason or another, it's not activated. Let's take the boogaboo drugs, the deadlier ones like heroin or opium. These are, they release endorphin, serotonin, these painkillers in your body. But we also have that, and that's part of the reason why you become addicted, because they mimic it and our bodies cease to create it naturally because we're getting it artificially. But the point is, we're already, we have it being created in ourselves. So this case with the THC, the discovery by Dr. McCollum that, we create THC was interesting because, we could be naturally in that state. And, this is talked about by, let's say, psychedelic researchers. And that's the thing, because I'm not like an active psychedelic user or anything like that. But the point is, once your mind gets open to that realm, you realize, hey, there's this higher level of consciousness. And then you dig into it a little more and you see that, hey, you know what? A lot of these ancient sort of spiritual paths, like whatever, tantric Buddhism, Hinduism, or what have you, they focus, they have these disciplines, meditation and things, and they focus on the chakra points, etc. I don't want to get all new agey, but like they say, like the pineal gland, it mimics, whatever, ayahuasca or some psychedelic substance. You focus on it, you release it, and so anyway, there you go. THC, something in the body does that. It's interesting. There's a merger between plant and animal or humans. And there's some symbiotic relationship there that can be explored to greater detail. But I had a lot of fun at the Cannabis Film Festival. And Mike Zaitkus, he does a lot of good work. I go to the High New York meetup groups once in a while. And it's part of an active New York City pro-cannabis culture. And, we've always been active at the forefront of that. And, I'm glad to be here and participate, at least show up to some of these things.
Yeah, it should be, right? It's New Amsterdam.
You're right. You see, there's a spiritual link between Amsterdam and New Amsterdam because there's so much Dutch like lineage here in New York. In fact, we were just recently looking at apartments up in Harlem, which is a Dutch name, and I believe, and then formerly owned by the Dutch. Yeah, there's a great heritage. So and in Amsterdam now, I haven't been there for like literally over a decade, but one of my favorite cities, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's one where it's relatively quiet, you could say right now.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's quieter here as well, but that's okay.
But even the coffee shops are noticing it, in that they relied so much on tourism that right now they're having difficulties even staying open.
I wanted to ask you about that, because I did actually see some stories on that, like how some of them may have shut down or now. So what's going on there? Like, is there like social distancing? Are you allowed inside, or are you forced to sit outside, like in New York? And what's the situation on the ground there regarding this COVID and the Amsterdam coffee shops and things?
Well, first of all, none of the coffee shops went out of business. So it was announced on, I believe, the 15th of March that the coffee shops would have to close, just like everything else. But already that evening, they could see the queues lining up outside, and the dealers giving their phone numbers to people in the queue. So they realized, okay, we can't do this. So they said, okay, the coffee shops can open again, but this happened the next day, but only for takeaway. So they kind of became, essential. And since then, Netherlands, we went into a sort of lockdown for 2.5 months. But I say sort of lockdown because it wasn't a full lockdown that we saw in neighboring countries, but also Spain, for example. Even from the start, we had some freedoms, and we did pretty well as a country. And since coffee shops, since July 1st, the day before the website launched, they have been allowed to have visitors inside of the coffee shops and actually sitting there. They do have to abide by this 1.5 meter rule. Unless you're with your girlfriend, for example, then it's fine. But with other people, they prefer if you are at 1.5 meters.
Really?
And one of the changes that was also recently made is that people are no longer allowed to smoke joints with tobacco inside of the coffee shops, because there was recently a new tobacco law passed, of which cannabis is not a part. But that meant that these joints that we smoke here, you're no longer allowed to smoke them inside. So what actually happened since the July 1st is that indeed some coffee shops went open again for the public, but also many decided to only be for takeaway, because they not only had to worry about these corona rules that are currently right here in place, they also had to worry about these tobacco laws. If someone from the municipality would come in and they would find a joint laying in an ashtray and it would contain tobacco, they could face huge fines for it. So considering those two things, many decided we're just going to stay for takeaway. And I'm not sure how that will be in the long run, because it's sad and it's also bad for drug policy, because those coffee shops, they were what you could say the social consumption rooms, like a word that is maybe more used in a way for the legalizing of heroin, for example, in Switzerland. But that was also the thing here. It's a social consumption room where the people inside, the visitors, but also the people who work there, they look after their clients. It might not be much, but they can see if someone is maybe needing some sugar or they need a drink, or if they maybe should not smoke that next joint. And that part is basically gone.
That's really, that's one of the saddest things about this whole thing, this whole coronavirus thing. Obviously, we don't have the smoke shops here, but, just the restaurants, coffee shops. I'd write so much of my articles in a coffee shop, like whether it's a local one or Starbucks. I like the atmosphere and, the stimulants of the sound and the smells and the coffee. In your case, you have even more stimulants going on. So it's more inspiring. But now I can't go anywhere. So it's, it's scary. But I mean, it's a really big concern. And I worry about the independent shop owner, and the restaurants, hopefully they'll be able to bounce back. But anyway, sad to see, sad to hear.
Yeah, here we're in that regard, we're also hit by it, obviously, but we can now go to pubs again. We can go to restaurants again. We have been for a while already, and also pretty much everything is open.
Yeah, I see. Okay, well that's great, man. I'm glad to hear you bouncing back.
Basically, the only thing that cannot happen right now are big social gatherings, like festivals.
Oh yeah, you're right.
But I hear that from September 1st, they are considering allowing the public back into the stadiums for the football matches, but they ask them not to sing.
Okay. All right, that's your concession.
So, yeah, nobody knows how it's going to be in the long run, and I also fear that we might go to a temporary lockdown here again, and maybe one after that again. But yeah, be prepared for it better this time.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. You know, my parents are in California, and I'd like to see them soon. I might do that, but then they just shut down again. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's also what I read today, indeed, about California.
yeah,
Yeah, it seems
cool.
to be a simple case of too early, too fast.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I hear. I talked to him on the phone, and you know, everyone in New York's got the mask on. Really, like 70% of people just walking down the street. But when I talk to my parents, they're the only ones with the mask on, and they feel a little weird. So you know, it must have something. It's a different lifestyle there. You know, New York, everyone's crammed together. It's an urban set out there. Everyone drives in cars. You know, there's more open space, so they feel maybe less inclined to follow these rules. But nonetheless, they might have an interaction, and you know, obviously something's going on down there that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also organizing an event that we actually did 2 times last year. We call it the Homegrown Cup, which is a cannabis cup for home growers. And while my colleague really wants to get it started and back running again and do one in December, I'm right now just giving it a couple more months, you know, before deciding all this, because you don't know how it's going to be in December, and I think it will be difficult. But
yeah, I mean, it's hard to plan stuff, you know, but you know, at least you got an outlet, you know, what being a writer, or in this case, this great, you know, podcast, you know, and editing. So you know, we can still be effective, but yeah, we're looking forward to that. You know, there's a lot going on. There are ways to take, you know, it could benefit, like in your case, launching Cannabis Industries. I got back into my music. Like I said, I have to run soon, because what it is that an offshoot of this coronavirus thing is that a lot of people left New York City. Like my friend, he's actually, you know, moved upstate. He actually bought a house. He's going to go in October. And the thing is, a lot of people are doing this exodus. My neighbor just left, but the prices for apartments have dropped like 30%. So my girlfriend and I have been looking. Our lease is up anyway at the end of the month, and we've been looking at a few places, and we found this couple places where, because we've got a small place, but this big sort of sprawling 2-bedroom, 2 baths, a big backyard. And it's really the price of a studio. Went from 27 down to 23. So anyway, we actually signed a lease already, and we're just gonna. I have to go and go to the office and pick up the key, because tomorrow's sort of the move-in. But yeah, man, I mean, you got to survive in this situation.
yeah, for sure, and adapt. Oh, I'm happy to hear.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've been talking already for over an hour, so we did pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I think an hour and a half maybe. That's good, right? Wow, it was a great conversation, and it's really exciting, dude. I'm very, you know, enthusiastic about this platform and like your whole website, man. Oh, so I told you I'm working on an article, and it's about tying in the cannabis prohibition with what's going on, the racism, the Black Lives Matter. I'm going to talk about Anslinger and the whole thing, you know, getting back to the musicians, the jazz musicians, Charlie Parker and them. and how they were singled out. And also, like with this, but basing it around sort of this Dana Beal interview the other day, we went for a walk. I meet him he lives in Midtown Manhattan, and usually there's like 1,000 restaurants all around. And we just kind of like, I say, hey, let's have lunch. He's like, all right, I'll be available at 6. So I go down, and we usually pop into like a Szechuan place or something around the corner. Nothing open at this time. We're walking, and all the restaurants are closed, man. I mean, this is Midtown Manhattan 2 days ago. So I'm like, dude, is this depressing? He's like, nah, New York will bounce back. I'm like, so this guy's a real optimist. But anyway, we finally walked by a hotel with outdoor seating in front. And we looked at the menu and it's like, oh, okay, they got pasta. So we sat down. We were the only ones there. And, I guess it was like maybe room service or something food. But, they served us. He got the seafood pasta. I got the spaghetti marinara. And, it was kind of cool sitting out there. Not many people, the skyscrapers around. But here I am talking to Dana Beal, and, he's got a lot to say. So that was a lot of fun, man. So I'm going to send, I'll have that article, like, I'm shooting for this weekend. I'm moving and stuff, but I'm excited to reconnect with you, dude.
Yeah, me too. And for sure we'll stay in touch and maybe do one of these again.
Yeah, you know what? Like if like something interesting comes, and do some some topic comes up, this is a great way to connect and get out there, man. I'm excited, and I don't usually do this kind of thing, once in a while, but it's nice and easy going with you. You know what I'm saying?
I'm happy to hear.
Cool.
Yeah, we could continue talking, but we have to make an end to it at some point. So I would say thank you very much for being my second podcast guest. And, I wish you all the best.
All right. Well, it's a real honor. I'm so glad you asked me to do this, Mauro. And until next time, man, take it easy.
For sure.
Bye-bye.